we have sown in spiritual things for you, is it not a great thing if we reap material things? That is, that they would provide? Paul is saying that there's a deliberate call upon his life, and it's been ordained by God. And I want to argue with you today that it's true about your life. Paul the Apostle, but true about your life. Thirdly, it's practical. God's call upon his people is that it's a practical call. A practical call by God upon our lives. Look at verse 12. If others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? Because Paul had brought them almost, as it were, to a spiritual birth and development. He says, nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the temple? Here it is, verse 14. This is the big deal. Even so the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. Stop right there. Practical. That's all very practical. God says those who minister the gospel are to be provided for by the congregation. Paul says that's exactly what the Old Testament teaches. It's what the New Testament teaches. And he's making his point to the Corinthians. But watch this. It's so practical. But when he says, even so the Lord has commanded that those who preach. Here's the cool thing about this. There is no way that this church can function without all of us being involved in the preaching activity. It's not going to happen. God uses the things that you have in your life by way of gifting and generosity. God uses the things in my life by way of gifting and generosity. And the whole push is to get the gospel to the world. And that's the next thing that we see. Look at verses 15 to 23. Number 2, it is this. God creates his witnesses. And I love this part. I love this point. In verses 15 to 19, his witness is the gospel itself. The gospel. The gospel, the word means the evangel, or the good news, the message of Jesus. That's what the gospel means. And the Bible tells us that the gospel is hidden in our hearts as Christians. Earlier I said, how many of you would raise your hands if you're Christians? If you raise your hands if you're Christians, we can only do that and be honest if the gospel is in our heart. That means you'd be able to tell people what the gospel is. Do you know the gospel? You can't, listen, you can't be saved by the gospel if you don't know what the gospel is. I don't know what it is, but I go to church. Not saved. I don't know what it is. I go to church sometimes, but I give money. Not saved. I go to church on Easter and Christmas. Not saved. I don't care if you go to church every day of the week. If you don't know the gospel, how can you get saved and calling out to Christ and dependence upon Christ without knowing why? It's impossible. The gospel, now watch, and I mean this in a theoretical sense. I'm not pointing at anybody, I'm not insulting anyone, but I'm saying that right here, right now, that the audience, as it were, is beginning to be whittled down to who is a Christian in life. Because the religionist now has got to step outside the camp. The recreational Christian has got to step outside the camp. Who is the 24/7, moment by moment, ever-present God in my life believer? This is the challenge of God's people. This is the lifestyle that we're to be living. And today you might be saying, this is insanity. I can't believe what I'm hearing. But the truth of the matter is, that is an actual relationship with the living God. Listen, can we not have moment-by-moment relationships with human beings? With people? Can you not have someone on your mind? Yes. How much more God if you know him? Now our group just got a little smaller because some can't relate to this. I don't understand what he's talking about. This is a very serious thing. His witness is the gospel.
Pastor and Bible teacher Jack Hughes, here on Real Life Radio, with his message called Every Christian a Life. Thanks for being with us today. You know, this message is part of Pastor Jack's series called 1 Corinthians, a series on the Corinthian church and the Apostle Paul's bold call for purity. And we'll continue on the next edition of Real Life Radio.